I think that when you say Chicago, it resonates, especially when you're talking about bringing players back, either American players or foreign players, bringing them into Chicago. It resonates. It's different than saying, hey, do you want to go play in Columbus?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to MIR97 Media. My name is Alexi Lalas, and today we have a very, very special guest joining the show. He is, of course, a U.S. Soccer Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defenders of his generation for the United States, an esteemed guitarist, and now a host for Fox Sports on television. So, Alexi Lalas, welcome to MIR97 Media, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. You read it exactly as I wrote it. I appreciate you doing that. It's fun to be with you to talk, all things Chicago, and what's hopefully, I would think, a step in a much more positive and brighter direction when it comes to the Fire. Absolutely,
because for my generation, it's really easy to take Major League Soccer in the U.S. for granted because it's always been there. It's been there as long as I can remember. But, when you were playing, very different story. And in that era, the Chicago Fire, also a very different story, because every time I talk to players, coaches, fans from that era, it's a very different way that we talk about the Fire. So I'm curious, you played against the Fire many times at Soldier Field. How was the way that it was perceived differently for you as a player in the league?
Yeah, so I'm sure all of your listeners, your viewers know the history of when it comes to the Chicago Fire. I started in MLS literally on day one when it kicked off in 1996. There was no Chicago Fire, but 2 years later, boom, they come not only as, the first expansion team, but right out of the chute with Bob Bradley, incredible players on the field, and established themselves with authority, if you will. And established themselves as not just a winning and competitive team, but one that played in an interesting way. Back then, we were playing at Soldier Field. I know it's kind of come full circle. But, along the way, on and off the field, whether it's great players on the field, whether it's great individuals off the field, the Peter Wilts and these types of people that have come on. And, it's meandered like anything else. It's had its good times and its bad times. Obviously, it's at a point right now where, from the outside, I look at the Chicago Fire, and in the same way that, for example, DC United started off on fire when they first started in the league, and the Galaxy, for that matter, did too. And, some of them have kind of kicked on and at least managed to maintain their status. Chicago, I think, has struggled to redefine itself or to be comfortable in what it is and maybe what it isn't. And, that type of existential crisis and self-examination has led to, at least from the outside, a loss of being relevant. And that's not something I take, any happiness in saying, because what Chicago meant initially and what it means now relative to Major League Soccer and to soccer in general, it needs to get back to where it was, and it can, because as you know, that area of the country, that community, the history that exists when it comes to soccer in Chicago, it's just not translating into a consistently competitive and good team, and one, like they said, that is relevant not just in Chicago, but relevant in terms of the soccer scene.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we look at the city of Chicago, no different to New York City or Los Angeles or any of the others, you walk down the street, you see Chivas jerseys, America, Real Madrid, Barcelona, USA, everything, all the above. Yet it's not Fire jerseys right now. And do you think that Chicago really is the sleeping giant of American soccer as a city?
I think so. To your point, it's incredibly multicultural there. It has a history when it comes to soccer, whether it's indoor or outdoor. The connection and the affiliation with soccer in general. And this goes not just for Chicago, but this goes for MLS, and it's something that they have had to fight. And one of the obstacles and challenges is that it's not that there aren't soccer fans in the United States, is that there are not enough MLS fans. And so converting those soccer fans en masse when it comes to the United States is one thing. But then in the individual markets, in this case, we're talking about Chicago, looking around, and I'm not telling the Chicago Fire staff and the men and women that work each and every day and have to come up against these challenges, anything that they don't know. It's, all right, we have soccer fans out there, but we want them to be fans of the Chicago Fire. We want them to be MLS fans. And that's not easy because people are entrenched. And when the product either on the field is not up to par or the experience off the field is not up to par, that's problematic.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, 7 seasons now, the Fire have not made the playoffs. That's the longest drought in Major League Soccer. It's the second longest in the history of the league, 1 year behind Toronto FC when they first came in. So that's a pretty bad run right here. Fire hoping to turn things around with their most ambitious coaching hiring in a minute, and that's Gregg Berhalter leaving the U.S. men's national team job in the summer after he was fired and being hired by the Chicago Fire. So let's speak a little bit first about Gregg and his time with the national team. I think his first tenure, the first cycle, I thought he's accomplished the goals that he set out to accomplish, won a couple trophies, performed well in the World Cup. Matt Crocker listens to the players, U-turns on that head coaching search and decides to bring him back in the summer of 2023, and then it kind of goes sour there. So I'm curious what your perspective was on his tenure overall, and especially that second portion where he came back and it didn't go as well.
Yeah, so while it didn't go as well and ultimately led to his firing, it's interesting to see that he became, in that second cycle, with that second chance, in a way he became more pragmatic and realistic with what he had and what he could do. And I think he was really kind of romantic in that first cycle, wanting to do big, bold things. And I have an incredible respect that he said, I'm going to die on this type of hill. And ultimately he did, but he did change in that second cycle. And I think that this is what relates it to Chicago, because I'm sure that the Chicago Fire fans are saying, well, what kind of Gregg Berhalter are we going to get? Because you can certainly look at him from a Columbus Crew standpoint, and then the national team experience. Well, first off, that experience, even though it ultimately ended in his firing and in failure over the summer in Copa America, he is better for it. So you are getting a much better version of Gregg Berhalter than at any time in the past. And I think you're getting someone with a point to prove. And I think that's a good thing. That it ended in failure over the summer. I don't think anybody quibbles with that, but will you get a more pragmatic type of approach from Gregg Berhalter as opposed to wanting to do big, bold things and wanting to be romantic and, for example, playing out of the back regardless of the situation, as opposed to saying, all right, I'm going to be much more rudimentary, much more direct at times. I'm going to live to fight another day. And it might not be pretty all the time, but it's going to be effective. And I don't want to speak for the Chicago Fire fans, but I got a feeling at this point right now, given the futility and given the failure, they don't care how you win. They just care at this point that they can see a winning team. And, the romance and the creativity and the beauty, if you will, that will certainly come. But what I've found over the years is that there's nothing more beautiful than winning.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you ask Gregg, and I think a lot of people would agree, he's a better coach now than he was when he first took the national team job at the end of 2018 after leaving the Crew. So
sure,
he was getting that experience in international soccer, which is obviously very different to the role he's going to be taking on in Chicago as a sporting director and head coach. So I'm curious how you think maybe, yes, the lessons he's learned with the national team, do you think a lot of them will not be able to translate to going back to club soccer? And do you think there might even be kind of a getting back used to I don't want to say learning curve because he's done it before, but getting used to being back in club soccer again?
Yeah, so this whole separation that has happened between, sporting director, technical director, whatever you want to call, the different titles, but this person that basically is in charge of a lot of the machinations and the decisions that go into basically getting the ingredients for then the manager and the coach to go in and cook it. And look, I don't begrudge any coach, whether it's Gregg Berhalter or anybody else, from trying to have as much power as they possibly can. because, sometimes there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and sometimes it is problematic in terms of people working in different ways and not being complementary. And so if you can bring it all under one person, and that one person can do a good job, there's not a lot of that actually that exists in MLS. We've seen people like Bruce Arena, Peter Vermes, those types of people be able to do it. It remains to be seen whether he is able to do both jobs. I think that Gregg Berhalter has it in him to do both jobs, and I'm not even convinced that it needs to be two jobs anywhere out there. But but ultimately, if Gregg Berhalter is going to be making the decisions when it comes to who is on the field, I also want him to be making the decision when it comes to who he is getting to put there out on the field. And I don't have to tell you, he's got a lot of things that he has to do, and it's one thing to coach him up, but he's not a miracle worker. And so I think he will see some of the diamonds in the rough and be able to coach up some of these players. But the reality is he's going to have to find a way, either contractually or trades or whatever, to also make some changes and bring in better quality or different quality that he just feels has a better upside.
Yes, I'm actually going to slide in a fun fact here as a transition to my next question, which is related. So in the 1995 Copa America, you scored a goal against Argentina in a 3-0 win. Frank Klopas, I believe, also played in that game and scored as well, if I'm not mistaken. So
actually, here's some more Chicago fun facts. If you watch that goal, and you're right, Frank Klopas, love Frank Klopas. I was actually just texting with him the other day. He scored a wonderful goal. It was a historic win. But if you watch the goal that I scored, Kobe Jones crossed the ball in, and I went near post because I was up recirculating on a free kick. The celebration runs to the sideline, and I jump into the arms of a blonde-headed substitute whose name was Gregg Berhalter.
Yeah, I know. I think when I look back at that roster, that's a very interesting roster from that Copa America, because it's kind of an in-between of the 94 generation, some of those guys from there, and some of the, the Claudio Reynas, the Gregg Berhalters, who were on the way up toward the end of that decade going into the 2000s. So I always thought that was an interesting tournament. And that was probably Frank Klopas' biggest tournament for the U.S. as well. So
it was probably for that generation that we associate with 94, it was probably, us at our peak, because obviously 1998 did not go well. It was an entire failure. But after the 94 World Cup and the success that we had, then a lot of us went on and played. I was playing over in Italy, and guys like myself and Kobe, we had never even been on the books when it comes to a club team. We just did it very backwards. This is why we have a lot of international caps, but we didn't have a lot of club experience. And so we were getting all of these interesting and different types of experiences and brought that to bear from a national team perspective. And so if I look back, it was an interesting mix, and we were kind of transitioning into that next generation, but still a lot of us that were young were getting these experiences that I think made us collectively good. And then things happened over the next couple of years, as they often do. But it was fun to play with guys like Frank Klopas and Gregg Berhalter. At that point, he was just coming into the national team, and it was fun to see him grow. The guys like Eddie Pope and those types of players that were coming along, Brian McBride, that then would obviously feature and star going forward in World Cups.
Mm-hmm. And I guess so it's a good transition then, going back to the national team a little bit. Yes, we have the continuity where it's largely the same player pool from the last cycle, but Pochettino's going to have about 16 games. Mauricio Pochettino, the new head coach. Bora, I want to say, had 96 in 3 years, which is, well, I mean, there are reasons for that, obviously, but you guys had a lot of time together going into that home World Cup. This time, Pochettino is going to have a few games here and there across a couple of months, effectively. So do you think that's going to be a very big challenge for him?
Yeah, so the time is actually almost identical, a year and a half to 2 years together. But to your point, the amount of time together is very, very different. We back then were actually in residency as a team in Southern California. That could never happen today, but it was just a function of the fact that we didn't have MLS. We didn't have a lot of places to play. And so we kind of functioned as a club team, which meant that we played all over the world. There weren't blackout dates or anything like that. We were just playing international games. Pochettino, on the other hand, he's got to get in and suss this out very, very quickly. I don't look at this as a long-term hire. I look at it as a short-term solution, but one that could be incredibly valuable and successful. I don't see a lot of change happening in terms of the players. There might be some names that we haven't been talking about that come up, especially with situations where, the striker position, I think, is still a question mark. The center back pairing is still a question mark going forward. Even the goalkeeper position is still a question mark. So you might see some changes come that first whistle in 2026, and Pochettino has to figure it out very quickly. I think he's been very open and honest in that he doesn't care where you play. He's talked about MLS. I think that's a good thing, for a good message for the players, and I guess for soccer to say, hey, it doesn't matter where you're playing, but I do want you playing, and I want you to playing obviously well and consistently. That's important. But he's going to have to also coach him up. So as good as Christian Pulisic is, as good as Weston McKennie is and certainly can be, and Tyler Adams, even with his physical situation, he's going to have to make them better. And to be fair to Gregg Berhalter, I think he always looked at it as a 2-cycle type of progression and evolution, whether he was involved or not. And so in theory, we should be seeing a lot of these players that we started talking about when they were teenagers come to fruition and be in their prime, if you will, come 2026. And I think that was the plan with this generation all along. But we should expect more from this generation. We should expect Pochettino to do things with this team, and this team to do things that we have not seen in the past. Otherwise, going to a World Cup is not an accomplishment. Getting out of a World Cup group is not an accomplishment. All right. Even winning a round of 16, or in this case, it would be a round of 32 game in 26. That's not an accomplishment. We've done that. We were a handball away, possibly, from going to a semifinal back in 2002. So we want to see the progress. We want to believe in this team and believe that this team can do things that we haven't seen before.
And of course, in 2002, it was Gregg Berhalter's shot that was blocked by Torsten Frings. So it could have been Gregg Berhalter who equalized for the U.S. and eventually it would hopefully send them through to a semifinal. But
it's VAR. It's the world of VAR in which we live in, and not having it around. So, oh well.
So in this offseason, Gregg is going to have a lot of work to do because 5 or 6 players have already been confirmed departures for the Fire. A lot of them players who have been around for a minute. There could be as many as 12 players that he gets to sign in this offseason, which for MLS is a lot, especially given how restrictive the rules are around the roster and how difficult it can be to move players off of contracts in this league. How do you think that he's going to shape this team in his own image, given that this is the first time in quite some time that he doesn't just have a limited player pool? He really has the world is his oyster, so to speak. He can go out and sign whoever he wants, and Joe Mansueto won't be afraid to back him up financially. What do you think are the main things that a coach like Gregg is going to look for in building a roster from scratch like this?
All right, so look, obviously finished 15th over there in the conference, dead last, bottom of the conference over there. So you can, I guess in theory, only go up. I hope you can only go up. The good part about MLS is that it doesn't punish you to the extent that you have to do things that are going to hurt the club either on or off the field. And you do get another chance, and you get to come back. And I don't think there's any league in the world that has a structure that enables you to finish last one year, but still gives you the opportunity the next year to finish first. And we have seen it, actually. Not as much. There is some separation now between the elites and everybody else. But, when you look at, let's see, goals for 40, puts you almost, second or third from the bottom down there. Goals against 62, which puts you way up there. The home field situation and the circumstances right now, and the advantage. Is there an advantage right now? Maybe, maybe not. You certainly have been there at different times, but creating an atmosphere that is conducive to winning, and then obviously rewarding the people that do come out with great play, goals, and winning. That's an important thing. When you look at the changes that you're going to make, you had a 10-goal scorer, right? When it comes to, that was the only double-digit goal scorer, and that you can certainly ride a player when it goes like that, but didn't score a lot of goals, and you certainly didn't have a lot of different players. Because 10 goals is fine, but I don't think there's any team in MLS, especially when we talk about the elite teams, that aren't having players that are up in the high teens into the 20s when it comes to goal scorers, and players that the opposition cares about and game plans for. I don't think that I ever heard anybody of late say, oh, I'm really worried about Chicago, or I'm really worried about this player or this player on Chicago. And you can't say that about the teams like LAFC, obviously Inter Miami, Columbus, these types of players. They all have people that you say, wow, look out. That is a problem right now. And so I think he's going to go out. Gregg Berhalter, I'm talking about. I think he's going to go out, and I think he's going to, like any coach, is going to look at the spine, and to the extent that he can spend money. I mean, to your point, if money is no option, don't believe it, because money is always an option. Especially, we love to spend other people's money, but to your point, he's got an opportunity to do something. And not a lot of coaches that come in always have that type of opportunity. It's not a complete clean slate, but it's enough of a clean slate where he can make some fundamental and massive changes. And this can't be looked at as a project, because this is MLS, and you can get better very, very quickly. And so as soon as you hear Gregg Berhalter, either as the coach or the technical director, talking about, trust the process, or it's a long-term type of plan, that doesn't fly in this type of situation. So you and fans of Chicago Fire should expect to see better results immediately. And certainly, given where they finished this past year, you can only go up, but not only go up in terms of making strides of one or two places. It should be playoffs or bust for next year, at the very least.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I think that Fire fans should have very, very high expectations for Berhalter this season. 2017 was the last time the Fire made the playoffs. They finished third in the Supporters Shield, one of the best teams in the league, Schweinsteiger, Nikolic, all that. The year before, they were the wooden spoon. They finished dead last in the entire league. So it's clear, even that was without a new head coach. So that was Veljko Paunovic both seasons. And overnight, like a switch, you bring in Schweinsteiger, you bring in a guy like that who raises the standard. It completely changed the way everything worked in the organization. When we look at this transfer window, Berhalter obviously has a lot of connections with the national team. He knows the player pool very, very well. I think more than people even realize how deep the national team is with connecting with players, tracking players around the world, even in lower divisions, that people never hear about this stuff. Do you think that that's going to be an area of expertise that he's going to depend upon when he's looking at building his team, and maybe bringing in some players he worked with the national team?
Sure. And I think that one of the advantages that Chicago has is Chicago. I think that when you say Chicago, it resonates, especially when you're talking about bringing players back, either American players or foreign players, bringing them into Chicago. It resonates. It's different than saying, hey, do you want to go play in Columbus? I love Columbus. Columbus is wonderful. Don't scream and yell at me about Columbus. But it is a very different conversation when you say, hey, Chicago. People have heard of it. People know what it is. And I think that it has an advantage like that. Now, Gregg Berhalter, in his capacity now, has to sell this. And whether it's through the connections that you are talking about, it'll be interesting to see if he is able to entice any returning national team players. Because, you got players out there. It's, the grass is not always greener. And, if you are willing to pay some money, I think he could entice some different players. I mean, you got players like, right now, Matt Turner, who's not playing overseas, and other players that have kind of gone over there, and they're playing in Europe, so they have that cachet and that sexiness of playing Europe. But when I say play, it doesn't mean that they're always playing. And there's nothing like home. And when I say home, I mean the United States for U.S. players. And then going out there and accessing your connections and talking to different people. And in this situation, it's about recruiting. And so Gregg Berhalter has to sit in front of these players and, their families or their extended families, and sell them on whatever the project is that he is working on, and sell them on the city, and sell them on the potential. And ultimately pay them good money. And I think, to your point, I think he has a real opportunity here to do that. And I'll be interested to see if he can bring in some different players and some, I guess, bigger names. They don't have to be bigger names. They just have to be better players.
I mean, in the recent past, semi-recent past, we've seen some national team players in their prime come back to MLS. Clint Dempsey, I guess he was a bit on the older side, but Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore. Do you think it's completely out of the question that, we've heard some names thrown out there in the last couple of months, like a Weston McKennie, a Josh Sargent, a Tim Weah? Do we think it's completely out of the question that before the 2026 World Cup, if things aren't going well for them, that those are guys who might come back stateside?
Yeah, I don't think it's out of the question for guys that maybe have kind of grown up and associate themselves with the U.S. And so it's a different thing for like a Tim Weah as opposed to a Weston McKennie. Weston's doing great right now. He's worked himself back into, the Juventus starting lineup. And, Timmy, to be fair to Timmy, also, he's last couple of weeks has gotten playing time, scored a goal, done all that. So that's fun to see. I will say that, again, sometimes all we see and are blinded by is the glitz and glamour and the cachet that comes from Europe. And, we focus so much on that 90 minutes. And sometimes we forget about the other 22 and a half hours of the day that these guys have to live. And, at times it's lonely. It's, at times depressing, I would think. Sometimes you don't know the language. Sometimes, if you have a family, a wife, kids, or anything like that, they're having to adjust to a completely different culture. And while as a player, you have the day in and day out of playing, sometimes, your significant other, wife and kids and all that kind of stuff, they don't. And it's not always easy. And, the homesickness, if you will, regardless of how old you are or how mature you are, it's real. It's real. And so the allure of coming back to the United States, especially before the 26th World Cup, I would not undervalue that when it comes to enticing players, like I said, to come back.
And if you had to maybe stick your neck out, who do you think is maybe one player from overseas in Europe potentially that you think that Gregg Berhalter might want to prioritize? Because for me, I think Luca de la Torre is someone who's struggling for minutes in Spain right now, in his prime, needs minutes if he wants to work his way back into the national team. And I see him as maybe somebody that Berhalter liked and might want to bring in.
Yeah. So there's someone right there. It would be interesting if, and I think a lot of this will be relative to Pochettino, who we talked about earlier, because if your goal is to play in the 26th World Cup, and Pochettino has made it clear that he wants you playing soccer, and you're not playing soccer, if you were to go to him and get his blessing, then I think it would be a whole lot easier. And I actually think that he would bless some of these things because I think he has an open mind. And I think he recognizes that, look, training is training, okay? But the game in and game out playing, that is more valuable to me. Mm-hmm. And so if a player like Luca or anybody else said, you know what, I can make good money here and I'm going to play each and every game. And it's not Europe, but do you think that will help me in your eyes? And you think that would make me a player that would be considered for the national team? And if he gave that blessing, I think that a lot of players, and not a lot of players, but certain players certainly would look at their situation and look very, very seriously about doing something like that, whether it's Luca or anybody else, or, the Bussios and the players that some of these players that are playing overseas, even the Brendan Aaronsons and stuff like that, who actually are playing. I still think that there is an allure to coming back that maybe they don't say out publicly, but again, if Pochettino were to bless it, I think they would be a whole lot more open to it.
And I guess just kind of coming full circle before we wrap up, Gregg Berhalter, I think we both agree, maybe didn't get enough credit from the USMNT fan base at times for the work he did, especially in his first cycle. How much pressure do you think there really is going to be in this job here in Chicago from not just Fire fans or local media, but just American fans in general who are, of course, tracking his progress and what he's up to now?
I mean, look, he failed this summer with the team and he got, very publicly fired, and he's going to get booed. It's going to get booed in any stadium that he goes to. As much as any player on the field, he is going to get booed as a coach. And I would, if I was him, I would look at that as a mark of honor because they know who you are. And I would expect that there are even some Fire fans, I'm sure you know them, that aren't particularly jazzed about this hire. And so it's up to him to prove his worth and to prove his value. And, the best way to kind of rehabilitate your image is to win. And in this case, to endear yourself to a fan base that now is long suffering. And the quicker you're able to do that, the quicker people are going to forget. No coach is simply relative to the last failure that they have, because every coach ultimately fails, and every coach, unless the very, very few that ride off into the sunset, every coach gets fired.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that they are a bad coach, doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good coach. But I do think that Gregg Berhalter is a good coach. I do think that, circling all the way back to the beginning, that he is better now for the experience that he had, and that Chicago is getting a better Gregg Berhalter than any other team in any other moment in Gregg Berhalter's coaching career. Remains to be seen if he can parlay that into success. But if he does, I think the way that we think about Gregg Berhalter can change, and can change very, very quickly. I think we're a forgiving people, and we're a forgiving nation. But he's going to get booed just like everything else. And you know me, I'm used to people saying things to my face and behind my back and online and all that kind of stuff. It comes with the territory. I'm not telling Gregg Berhalter anything that he doesn't know, but I wish him well. I think there are a lot of people that, maybe some of them privately, but I'm doing it very publicly, I am rooting for him to have success. For him individually, obviously, you know, for the Chicago Fire, that's the vehicle in which he is going to use, hopefully, to have success, and maybe rehabilitate him if he even needs that in some people's eyes. And no matter what, some people are still not going to like him, and that's their problem.
Of course. And I know we're both looking forward to seeing what's going to happen in the next months and years as he starts this new job. One last thing I wanted to ask about, which is completely unrelated to the Fire, but since I have you here, I just wanted to ask about it. You've done quite a few songs in your day, but the one I wanted to ask about is a music video that you were in before the 2014 World Cup. It was a song, I think it was for a television campaign about painting the World Cup red, white, and blue. Do you remember this?
Goodness. I vaguely remember doing something like that. I think we might have even gotten in trouble at some point from FIFA for that video, because we probably didn't license something out. And I can't remember who it was, but I mean, if it's out, a lot of stuff is out there. So I take full responsibility and credit. But, you know, a lot of stuff is in the past, and a lot of stuff in my old mind just gets lost in the cobwebs.
Yes, the reason I had to bring it up is because my brother loved that video.
Oh, really?
And he was trying to track it down and just could not find it at all because it doesn't seem to exist anymore on the internet. So
really, and like I said, I think maybe we got in trouble because if I remember correctly, there was a moment in the video where we had the actual World Cup trophy and we were doing something to it, and FIFA is, you know, very, very sensitive about anything that's done to the actual trophy. And, you know, it wasn't horrible, but it was, for them, maybe something that was not something that they liked out there. So I'll see if I can scrounge that up. I don't even know if I have it. And if you had not said this, there's no way I would have remembered this. I do a lot of things I have done over the years.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I'm glad I could get that deep pull and maybe kind of answer that question about what happened to it. I guess that answer makes sense. If
yes, I'll find out what happened to it. I do remember shooting it. Actually, not far from where I'm sitting here in Los Angeles here. So I do remember shooting it, and yeah. So I'll see if I can scrounge it up for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for, of course, taking the time out of your Friday to speak with us here at MIR97. Do you have any final words about the Fire or Berhalter that you just want to end with?
Well, Alex, I want to thank you for what you're doing. You know, I am now looked at as, you know, one of the old guys, and I'm proud of not just where we have come from, but where we are going. And one of the things that makes me proud is when I meet, you know, men and women that, and sometimes very young men and women that have gravitated to not just Major League Soccer, and in this case, not just Chicago Fire, but soccer in America in general. And it warms the cockles of my redheaded American soccer heart to know that this next generation is picking up the fight, if you will. Because I think soccer in America is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's incredibly unique and different. I think we need to lean into that. But I also think that it needs protecting, and it needs defenders, if you will. And I love the fact that, you know, you're doing something like this, and, you know, we can certainly think globally, but act locally when it comes to our soccer, and we can have our affiliations around the world. But, you know, ultimately, don't let anybody tell you that America is not a soccer country. Don't let anybody tell you that we don't have a soccer culture. We do. It's growing. It's vibrant. It's discerning. It's smart. And like I said, it's worth defending. So thank you. And to all of, you know, people of your age and even younger that are out there each and every day defending it.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. And once again, thank you for joining the show. I really appreciate it. And we're really glad we could have you on. And I think the Fire fans will really appreciate some of the things you had to say about this new generation, this new era of this team, and hopefully looking forward to seeing a winning product so that it can be more fun for the fans, more fun for people like me, and I think more fun just for the people around Major League Soccer to have the sleeping giant hopefully awake like we spoke about before. So thank you very much.
There you go. I appreciate it, Alex. Thanks.